I'd just like to introduce our first speaker this morning. Her name is Professor Jeanne Zaidel-Rudolph, and she is a renowned South African composer, pianist, and teacher. She was the first woman in South Africa to obtain a doctorate in composition. She studied at the University of Pretoria under Stephan's Grove?
Stephan's
Grove, and at the Royal College of Music in London, and with Ligeti in Hamburg. She's been awarded many prizes and honors in South Africa and abroad. Of her over 100 works covering diverse genres, some have been performed by the Johannesburg Philharmonic Orchestra, by the ensemble, I don't know how to pronounce this,
the Solisti Venetti
in Padua, ensembles in Rome, and by the United Nations Orchestra in New York. Jeanne was commissioned to arrange the official composite version of the South African national anthem and also wrote its final verse. She is Professor Emeritus in the Wits University School of Arts and Music in Johannesburg. So now I hand you over to Jeanne.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Geraldine and team, for inviting me to share a music career that spans nearly 70 years. And as we begin, may we have Israel and the hostages in mind at this difficult time in the war. I also want to briefly introduce you to my past student, Evans Nechabambi. Here he is, and Evans has helped me enormously. Evans was actually the very first Black PhD student to graduate in a South African university under my supervision. So I'm very proud of him, and he's helping me with the technology. My music career began at the age of 5 when I climbed up onto the piano chair and I proceeded to play the piano piece that my brother was learning. My mother realized it was time to find me a teacher. By age 6, I was composing my own piano pieces, even though I couldn't spell yet, but I composed a series of Russian dances spelled R-U-S-H-E-N. My young years were spent performing widely in concerts, Eisteddfods, and playing in UNISA piano exams. As much as I loved performing, my love for composing and creating original music grew from then. A few events influenced my decision to become a composer. At age 12, while playing the Feu d'Artifice, the fireworks by Debussy in a very big concert, I had what most pianists absolutely dread, a memory lapse. My subconscious creative juices kicked into gear, and with a basic knowledge of impressionist material and techniques, I proceeded to improvise for at least half a minute in the style of Debussy until my memory returned, and without missing a beat, I segued once more into Debussy. So I realized I could compose. At age 14, I gave the South African premiere of the Morton Gould Interplay for Piano and Concerto with the Johannesburg Symphony Orchestra under Jeremy Shulman. It was a very challenging piece for both pianist and orchestra. And the bass player approached my mother after the final rehearsal and said to her, "Mrs. Zaidel, I hope that your daughter has an appendicitis attack before the performance." Well, my mother was horrified and taken aback and said, "Why?" So he said, "Well, this concerto is exceptionally difficult, not only for her, but for the orchestra. And at the tempo that the conductor wants us to play, it's impossible." So this kind of rattled me, although it was a kind of backhanded compliment. But what really clinched my decision to be a composer and not a pianist was a more pragmatic reason. I had chosen an exceptionally difficult program for my final piano exam at the university, among which was the Bach-Busoni-Chacon transcription. The hand stretches demanded by the piece were enormous. After my recital, I was left with severe ganglions in both my wrists. My external examiner at that exam was Adolf Hallis. He was later to become my piano teacher, but as my external examiner, who also examined my singing exam, he was renowned for his puns, and he was heard to say, "She's decidedly a better pianist than a singer." And his other pun was always, "Alles sal recht kom, alles sal recht kom." So, of course, if you remember some of your Afrikaans, you'll know what that means. I was incredibly privileged to study with world-renowned teachers. At the Royal College, I owe them a tremendous debt of gratitude. At the Royal College, my superb piano teacher was John Lill, who was the first British pianist to win the Tchaikovsky International in Russia. He was a Beethoven specialist, and the first terrifying time that I was in a lesson with him, he sat me down and made me sight read the forehand transcription of the Beethoven Grosse Fuge. It was quite terrifying. While at the Royal College, I won the Cobbett Prize for Composition with a piece called Reaction, which was performed actually by a trio of us, I was a pianist, of female performers, which is another area that I will speak about, the feminist aspect of being a woman composer in a man's world. While still at the Royal College, I attended a concert of new music at the South Bank by Georges Ligeti. His music was used in 2001 Space Odyssey, which Stanley Kubrick, of course, was a producer. But he hadn't asked Ligeti's permission to use his music. So this grew into a court case, and it just brought home for me how terribly important it is to safeguarding one's intellectual property and the importance of copyright. Anyway, that night I just happened to have a portfolio of original compositions with me at Ligeti's concert, and then with some chutzpah, I went backstage, introduced myself, and handed over my music to this world-renowned composer who lived in Hamburg. An invitation arrived 2 weeks later to join Ligeti's composition class in Hamburg. Unbeknown to me at the time, his son, Lucas, who lived in Vienna at the age of, well, he was 9 years old when I studied with his father. There's a wonderful history of synchronicity here, because 30 years later, I went to a concert at Wits University in the concert hall, and I saw on the program for electronic music, Lucas Ligeti. And I went backstage and asked if he was any relative to the famous Georges Ligeti, and he said, indeed, he is my father. And from that moment onwards, we've had a wonderful friendship, and I became Lucas's mentor and supervisor for his doctorate in composition, which he got in 2020. So this was coming full circle. From my teacher, I became the teacher of Lucas. I register all my works now with SAMRO because of the idea of importance of copyright. And in fact, I was co-opted onto the board of the South African Music Rights Organization, where I served for 10 years, and I enjoyed every minute of it because we facilitated beautiful scholarships and bursaries, and had a very powerful influence on the arts policy in the country. On my return to South Africa, I embarked on a long academic career at Wits University for the next 44 years, which I'll speak about. At the present time, I'm actually writing my memoirs. I've been commissioned by the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Studies as part of their project called African Biographies. And I'm hoping that my memoirs, my autobiography, will be able to be published sometime next year. So at Wits University, I eventually became a professor of theory and composition, which, as I say, for nearly 44 years, which I'll go back to. I'm often asked what it's like to be a woman composer in a predominantly male domain. Sir Thomas Beecham famously said, "There are no women composers, never have been, and most likely never will be." There has been an unfortunate history of prejudice against women composers, indeed against even women performers. As we know, even the Berlin Philharmonic did not accept women performers until reasonably recently. In the concluding phrase in my autobiography on feminism, it states, "I find the idea of genderizing and politicizing what is essentially the domain of the soul abhorrent and ineffably sad. Music occupies a realm of experience far beyond reproductive or intellectual anatomy." I was not a feminist activist in a traditional sense, except, of course, the equal pay issue. But I've had my fair share of challenges. For example, in 1986, I submitted a work called Tempus Fugit anonymously to the Total Oil competition, the very first in South Africa, Total Oil for Composers. So it was an anonymous entry, and at the prize-giving evening, when it was actually announced who the winner of this competition was, I had been the only female amongst about 30 or 40 entries by other male composers. And when the chief judge announced who the winner was and proceeded to mention my pseudonym, of course, I was the only one in the hall who realized that I had been the winning entry of this competition. But the chief judge looked shocked and there was a silence. And he looked around and he said, "Oh, I could have sworn that that was the handwriting of one of the male composers that I happen to know, because I had submitted my entry having asked a calligraphy specialist to rewrite my score so it would not look like my handwriting." And another issue was when the famous Cantor Yitzhak Meyer Helfgott was invited to South Africa. He had never worked with a woman musical director before or a pianist. He was very resistant to working with me, but finally agreed with some very strong persuasion, and the concert was eventually very superb. So it was for these kind of reasons, the sort of like historical prejudice against the women and composers. Many organizations and festivals sprung up devoted exclusively to women's music. In the United States, there was the IAWM, the International Association of Women in Music. There was the Donne in Musica in Italy, which I attended a couple of times, and that was exceptionally powerful as a promoting body for women's music. I'd like to play you a little bit of my Tempus Fugit, which was the winning piece of music in that competition. And what you will be hearing is the influence still of Ligeti, but you will hear the African music cycles. So this piece still had the influence of Ligeti and the African music cycles. That's Masada. I'm sorry. We'll just go back. It's here. The second movement going into the third movement, but just a clip, short bit. Here the third movement begins. So what is quite audible there is what we call polyrhythms, layers of rhythms almost like fighting against each other, but also I have a predilection and a love for the percussion instruments. So you hear a lot of percussion instruments there, the African marimbas, all the hand percussion. Anyway, going on a family visit to Israel in 1989, we visited Masada, the mountain. I was so inspired by this majestic mountain and its incredible history. I was commissioned by the University of Potchefstroom to compose a work for bassoon and string quartet, which resulted in the writing of Masada. Geraldine knows the story of Masada as presented at a conference on art musics in Israel in London in 2011, story for another time. The music reflects the spatial beauty of the low Dead Sea and the high mountains. And I'm just going to briefly read a critique of my CD in which Masada appeared, written by the late Dr. Mary Roerich. And she says that Masada has its origins in Jewish narrative. If less in the actual events of the celebrated siege, then in a spatial visualization of its lofty location, alongside that of the low-lying Dead Sea. Using the unusual combination of bassoon with string quartet, Zaidel-Rudolph adeptly and movingly landscapes the empty contours of the mountain, the silence of the besieged Jews, and the awesomeness of their resolve. The bassoon acts as a narrator, while the work's expressive ambience is more overtly textured by sparse, shivering string harmonies, Stravinskian syncopations, and abrasive cluster chords. So I'm going to play a little bit of Masada for you now, and these are the things that you will listen to, the beauty of the spatial environment of the mountain. This video was made at a tribute concert to me at the Wits University by a quartet led by Zonta Hofmeyr, and Paul Rogers is the bassoon soloist. What I forgot to mention there was that this Masada has had many performances. One of the nicest was when it was chosen by Donna in Musica to be performed by the I Solisti Musici, this exceptionally wonderful group of musicians in Padua in 2018 as the selected competition composition piece. And I'm sure you must have noticed that in that particular audience was my sister-in-law Pam, who's watching today. This So it goes into the rather agonizing section, which eventually leads up to the mass suicide of the zealots. I also forgot to mention that I was conducting this particular performance, but as you could see there. moving on, it seems a little disturbing to me to be most well known for my role in writing the South African national anthem. In 1995, I would be far more appreciative if people actually knew me for my, I'm just going to leave that there for a minute, for my work in orchestral music, in piano music, in chamber music, in all sorts of other music, but I seem to be known for the national anthem. A little bit of history. In 1995, I was invited to a committee meeting in Pretoria by the then Minister of Arts and Culture, Dr. Ben Ngubane. But Mandela had made a directive that the new anthem, which should be a composite version of the old D-stem, and the Nkosi Sikeleli should not be longer than maximum 2 minutes. So he wanted a new anthem produced post-democracy. The meeting was chaired by Ms. Likaza Kumalo, Professor of African Languages at Wits University. Members were given the opportunity of making suggestions, but being that I was the only full-time active composer on the anthem committee, my suggestion was accepted for the new musical arrangement, and this was adopted. I was given the task of producing this new composite version of the 2 previous anthems, and it seemed only right to place Nkosi first, since this was post-apartheid, and followed by a modulation bridge into the D-stem. The reason why a modulation bridge had to be put in for the music was if it just went in the one key, the average person would not be able to sing it. It would have been too high. So that went into the stem, and I decided, since there was no English in the previous national anthem, that I should write an English verse, which was the last verse, and this was accepted by Cabinet. And amazingly enough, 5 of the 11 languages are actually contained in a very, very short anthem. They are represented, but what isn't represented is Chivenda, Tsonga, Ndebele, Tswana. These are not represented, but what are represented is the Zulu, the Xhosa, the South Sotho, English, and Afrikaans. So I produced the new composite version for voice and piano, as well as the full orchestral arrangement. The orchestral version was premiered at the Cape of Good Hope Centre in 1997, with me and my family as invited guests. In 2004, as a result of my arrangements of this anthem, President Mbeki, as you can see with Frank Chikani there, presented me with the Order of Ikamango, and on my plaque reads her outstanding contribution as a composer, pianist, and teacher in the development of music in South Africa and internationally. In December 2017, Nkosi Sikeleli Africa, the new version, was rated in a poll by The Economist, the newspaper, as, quote, the best in the world, the best anthem. It describes the anthem as, quote, an act of musical healing by the Rainbow Nation, for the Rainbow Nation. In 1997, an honorary doctorate was conferred on Mandela. Oh, that was the order as it stands. It's actually the plaque on my wall, and I read you the quote on the actual plaque as the and there was the medal at the bottom. So this actually is just a picture of me at Wits University, and the reason why I'm even putting it on here is because I'm speaking about Nelson Mandela, and this is a picture of George Bezos, Professor Louisa Nongsa, me, my husband Michael, who was Professor of Community Dentistry, and Max Price, who became the Vice Chancellor of UCT. And of course, George Bezos was very close to Mandela. And what happened in 1997, it was decided that an honorary doctorate was to be conferred on Mandela by the Ben Gurion University at the Baxter Theatre in Cape Town. So I composed the Mandela song called He Walked to Freedom. The late Helen Hildemith wrote the words, and He Walked to Freedom for the occasion was sung in 1997 by Aviva Pelham and Marcus Dusondo. I'm sure some of you know Aviva or remember Aviva Pelham. But the recording that I'm going to play for you here is one that was done by a very dear friend of mine, Oshi Tugendhaft, and Dina Copenhagen. I have a history with Oshi going back many years. I met him 6 months after the war in Israel in 1967, when we went together on a youth leadership tour, met him there, and we became friends, and I became his accompanist. Now, Oshi was the conductor of the Sydenham Highlands North CHOL choir, and after he became the chazan and cantor, my brother took over, my late brother, Malcolm Zaidel, of blessed memory. And the recording here that you're going to hear is by Oshi and Dina. And I toured many times with the Sydenham choir, with Oshi Tugendhaft, and we went overseas. We literally covered the length and breadth of America. We went to Australia, we went to London. We had a beautiful concert called Celebration, and we presented this in many countries over 15 years. So here is the Mandela song. I'm going to have to cut that short because I've still got quite a bit to get through. My focus area at Wits University was the overtone or throat singing of the Ngoko Women's Cultural Group in the Eastern Cape. My collaboration with these Xhosa women dates back to 2003, when I embarked on my very first field trip to the Ngoko village. Our field trips culminated in many hours of recordings and also in the composing of new intercultural works by me and my students. What I'm most proud about is my interculturalism, which always incorporates either Jewish elements and or African elements, and that's in my Western art music. My devoted husband, Michael, who was then Professor of Public Health Dentistry at Wits, drove me on hazardous roads to Queenstown, then onto the Nkoko village. I was commissioned to compose an intercultural work incorporating the women's choir, indigenous instruments, plus a Western ensemble of 11. are the women who sang about birth, death, children, initiation, marriage, divination, ancestor worship, prayer, rain songs, and themes from daily life. And my work, which you've just started listening to, Life Cycle, was born, and also it's the life cycle of the nation there. And this Nkoko cultural group was formed in 1983 in the Nkoko village near Lady Freer. The women became the subject of a collaborative WITS UCT research project. These amazing women, assisted by their mentor and translator Tsholwane and Paipeli that you saw, received us graciously and shared with us the art of their throat singing, a vocal technique which is very, very different. It was also, my work was premiered at UNISA in 2003 with Hans Hewson conducting. So here is a little bit of that performance at UNISA in 2003. That performance was, that particular song that you've just heard was by a mother who was very worried about her son who'd been sent away for initiation, and she wasn't sure that he would ever be seen again, that she would see him. Now I want to talk about one of my most important professional highlights. I entered my oratorio for human rights in 2017, and I was a winner out of 400 entries in the competition. And it was for the Global Women in Human Rights, together with Donna and Musica. And Michael and I attended the gala celebration in Rome. And what was to be a piece for 12 instruments, which is what I submitted, unfortunately, I thought I can't do a bigger orchestra because that's what they said. When I walked into the rehearsal and I saw that they had enlarged the orchestra to almost a full orchestra because they apparently wanted to present it in the best possible way, and they liked the music. I was very thrilled that that had happened. So we'll go through the Donna and Musica mission statement for women. Empowering women composers recognizes their ability and potential to create new works involving the world, different cultures and musical fields. Music knows no boundaries. The fundamental role of women in the creation and transmission of tangible and intangible cultural heritage and creation and practice of music belongs not only to a people or a culture, but also to humanity. Here was the invitation to the gala concert in Rome, which we went to, which was held in that is, just by the way, a picture I took of the beautiful synagogue in Rome. And here, people at the concert that night, a representative from the ambassador in Rome, Jeanette and Pepu, and a very dear friend of mine, Dorothea from Munich, who came to the concert, who I think is on this Zoom. And this lady was from the United Nations representative. Here was the program. And as you can see, my work was presented, the Oratorio for Human Rights, as the keynote work after the award ceremony. This is the magnificent Teatro Argentina, which is the beautiful opera house in Rome at which the music was presented. It was absolutely beautiful. And here was the plaque that I received as the winner of the call for Global Women in Human Rights Music. Here was the award ceremony of the finalists. This was the creator, Patricia Atkins Keaty. Unfortunately, she passed away. She was a very dear friend of mine 3 months before this wonderful presentation of the oratorio. I don't want to go into too much of this. I'd rather play the actual music. And this work was based on the text of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I set the music to the text of social security, work and rest, standard of living, education, the rights of mother and child, culture and copyright. Here is some of the rehearsal, which I'd like to play a little bit of the rehearsal. I'm going to have to stop it there, but the words were, education is the heart and soul of our humanity. And here is the actual performance. I'll play a little bit of the performance in that magnificent theatre. This is on YouTube under my name and Oratorio for Human Rights. That gives you a good idea of what the music sounds like. You can go onto YouTube and listen to the full performance of that night. Now back to Wits. Of course, I entitled my talk. What's the title of my talk? Yes, at my wits' end, at my wits' end and other beginnings. So I was officially retired in 2013 after having 2 wonderful tribute concerts given to me fully of my works in 2008 and 2013. That's another excerpt, but I don't have time to do that now. This was one of the tribute concerts, and I thought I would graciously retire and make a graceful exit in 2013, but unfortunately events conspired against me, and I'll just briefly tell you what happened. That I invited Yossi Reshef in 2013, in the year that I was leaving, to come and give a performance. A brilliant pianist, an Israeli pianist, but somebody living in Berlin. And soon after he'd started the concert, there was a pro-Palestinian mob, a student mob that came into the hall, broke the doors, broke the windows, and disrupted the concert completely. I had the Israeli ambassador sitting in the front row who had to be shepherded out quickly out of the back door. And it was a most unfortunate way of ending my year there. I had no idea that it had actually coincided with the Israel Apartheid Week on campus. But eventually what happened was the Vice Chancellor undertook to replace that concert, and I invited the most stunning, superb, the Daniel Zamir Jazz Quartet, who came and they played in a beautiful concert at Wits. But a lot of people actually withdrew their sponsorship and ownership because of what had happened. Now, the idea of my new beginnings, I haven't stopped my ties with Wits. There was a most poignant concert on the 15th of October at Wits, playing my trio, playing my music. I was on the same program as Mendelssohn and Shostakovich. And me and Mendelssohn were the Jewish composers on the program, and Shostakovich wrote his piano trio, which is absolutely magnificent, and as a tribute to a Jewish friend of his that had passed away. The poignancy of that concert was, it was 1 week after this terrible massacre on the 7th of October. And the tone and the atmosphere of the music was exceptionally powerful, as a tribute to these kind of historically upsetting aspects. And in fact, the violinist got on stage with tears in her eyes, and she said, "I'm going to cry before the performance," she says, because it takes, the Shostakovich takes so much out of me, and the middle movement of the Zaidel-Rudolph as well, that I would rather cry now before the actual performance than cry during the performance. So what are these new beginnings are also the fact that now I can enjoy being a mother to our 5 daughters and a grandmother to our 18 grandchildren. And I have to leave time now for questions if there are any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeanne. That was a wonderful, and it's so wonderful to see somebody with so much talent who has given it to the people, so that she's made so many people happy and found out so much and really used her talent so fantastically. So if anybody'd like to ask a question, could you raise particularly your virtual hand, which if you go to reactions, it says raise your hand, and then you'll immediately come up to the front, or just unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment.
Well, I don't see reactions, but I think Jeanne Zaidel-Rudolph is absolutely amazing. What she has achieved in her life is exceptional, absolutely exceptional. And the fact that she had a loving husband who was prepared to go over those terrible roads and go into the Eastern Cape and make the connection with those people, and then create music which was derived from that, is also very, very exceptional. You know, most people sit at home and they'll write their music and that's it. But she has actually broadened her horizons, and I think it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Kol hakavod. Really.
Absolutely. Laura.
Yes, that was wonderful, Jeanne. Thank you so much. I know very little about music, and especially not composition, but I found it fascinating, and I love the African influences. What I wanted to ask you is, with the Masada composition, why particularly strings and bassoon?
When I returned to South Africa, I had brought with me the inspiration, and I knew I wanted a small ensemble. And when Potchefstroom actually commissioned me to write a work, I knew that that was the work that I wanted to write. And the bassoonist, there's a superb bassoonist, Fani Jooste, and Fani Jooste specifically asked for a work for string quartet and bassoon.
So it was, it's very haunting, the bassoon. I mean, it's got a very haunting sound to it.
And what I didn't mention was that it's a piece with tremendous hidden tensions. There's the underlying kind of like narrative, but it's tremendously tense, which works towards the climax and then eventually the sadness at the end. But I don't have time to play the whole work. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Sheila, would you like to unmute and give us your
Is that me, Sheila?
Yes, Sheila.
I'm very proud to say my few words for this amazing icon, a South African woman who is our icon for many, many reasons. As a proud woman, a proud Jew, she spoke for everything that I personally hold sacred. And music is the most sacred way for me to express all of that. Jeannie, congratulations.
Thank
You're
you.
only beginning.
Thank you, Sheila.
You're only beginning.
Thank you very much. If anybody wants to hear more music, there is some of my music on YouTube, which you can access. Yeah.
And just to say,
Rochel.
Absolutely amazing.
Sorry, Philip was first. I bow to my superiors.
hardly, but Jeannie, just call up aboard. And I thought your main contribution to all of us, the rest are Shane and Yiddish. And now it's really broadened the horizon enormously, and to actually hear the words and the story behind it was fascinating. Shane and Dank.
I dank, Philip. Thank you.
Okay, Rochel.
Thank you, Geraldine. We have a Yiddish group and one every Friday morning, and run from the Cape Jewish Seniors. Philip is the dean of the faculty. I'm the lowly teacher. And Jeannie is a loyal supporter. And there's not a Friday morning, Erev Shabbos, when I know Jeannie is busy because she's a Yiddish mama and a balabosta, but she's always there. Jeannie, it makes us so, so proud. Stolz, the word is stolz in Yiddish, to see your achievement, to hear about them. We know you've done a program. And Jeannie, in Yiddish, they say, du hast uns gegeben a sach naches.
I dank. Thank you.
And naches, what is a definition? It's the interest on our investment. We invested in you and you've paid us back handsomely. I dank. And thank you for sending the link. I didn't know what CHOL was about, but now I know. And I look forward to hearing about Sally Aronofsky. We sat in Joburg Park in Joburg on a Sunday and listened to his concerts, Eli. Sally Aronofsky and the orchestra. Yeah.
Well, it's
So that's a different orchestra. Yeah. The JSO was German, but Solly was, I think, the Jewish Guild. Yeah, possibly.
The Jewish Guild, yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. So I think we've been very fortunate to have a wonderful presentation, and I'm really proud that we've given this opportunity for Jeannie to talk to us, and that it will be recorded and it will be on the website, so that her amazing life and achievements will be available for everybody to listen to. And as Jeannie said, if you want to hear the music more, there are pieces on YouTube, which if you look for her name, you'll be able to see. So Jeannie, just may I thank you for the fantastic work you've done to compile this beautiful presentation for us and to speak to us today. We've been really, really happy to have you to do this.